ultimately backfire. And they were willing to think about this differently. Prioritizing this can't be number 6 on a list of things you're doing. It probably shouldn't be number 3. It should probably be 1 or 2. We actually asked that question in first meetings. Is this your number 1 priority? Is it your number 2? If not, we're not that interested. Making this a priority is extremely important from a resource allocation and accountability standpoint. And then finally, the collaborative nature of this. Collaboration in the support of results. We don't believe in collaboration for collaboration's sake. We don't believe in partnership for partnership's sake. We believe in partnership and collaboration in service of results for kids, and that's academic results and measurable ones. And so the desire to do this in a way that was collaborative, but in service of results, was extremely important to us. I'm going to let Mike talk a little bit about the internal structure, and then we'll try to get you on your way. You want us to stop?
And then the other time, you want to do that.
Yeah.
I'll be brief. Again, thank you for having us. I'd just like to add that both David and Justin talked about the fact that this is a partnership in the real sense. This is a partnership because the superintendent of this school district is a visionary, a true leader. He's willing to take risks. It's a partnership because the union leadership in this district has already stepped up to the plate and suggested that we can't do what we have been doing for so long the same way. And so they've been at the table, and even though there may be some differences of opinion, the goal is to try to get what's in the best interest of the kids. When we structure the internal lead model, if you will, the lead partner, which is internal, it requires the superintendent to really align with our tenets at Mass Insight, and that is, you've got to give the individual who you put in place the flexibility and the autonomy to do what they need to do in the cluster of schools that have been identified as in need of assistance. And that individual has to be held accountable and is accountable to the superintendent, particularly for results. And as Justin has mentioned, it's not enough to just simply suggest that you put this in place. You've got to really rethink how the central office begins to deal not just with the transformation zone, but with daily practice across the entire district. We see this transformation zone as a place where best practice will be developed and then implemented across the entire district. In order to do that, the superintendent and his leadership team have to rethink their individual roles. And that really begins to think about district transformation. We're no longer in an era where one size fits all. I think you probably have heard that. We've got to give parents and students options. And in order to do that, you cannot hold tight to some of the attributes, if you will, or characteristics of the model that's been in place for public education for over 150 years. And as such, you've got to really think about central office, as they are doing here at the state level, with providing support. Yes, holding people accountable, but thinking about the role as being one of support. And we nationally seem to think that indeed the cluster model that we've talked about here previously, along with the whole idea of changing the nature of how districts operate, not that they're held less accountable, but we really believe that the action that has to take place to improve access to quality for all kids has to begin at the classroom. That's the focus. And in order to do that, not only the district leadership, but also the school leadership has to think differently about how they provide service. That's our model. That's what we try to do. And the fact of the matter is that we have in Evansville a team of folk who are moving in that direction. And I honestly believe that we will see some great results as a result of the vision and the risk-taking, because there is risk here, that these two individuals and others within the district have taken. Thank you.
I want to actually commend Evansville. Outreach is about providing support, and it is so exciting to go into a school district where they already have lead partners and they already have systematic change that is in progress and in place to bring about school improvement for their schools that are in need. So you are to be commended. Outreach working with you is like, oh my gosh, everything's ready to go, and it's laid out, and we know how you're working things. It's taken us a little bit of time to figure out your single point of contact, but I like that. We know we can't just walk into your schools. We need to actually speak with people who are in charge of that transformation zone and make sure that we're not interrupting what's going on in the classrooms and what's happening with the transformation pieces. So that's exciting to us to be able to work alongside you, provide whatever supports you might need in addition to what you're doing. So we don't want to interfere with what you're doing because we think you have an excellent plan in place as a systematic change as a district to move forward with your schools. We're not sure the status of Glenwood. We haven't assigned, we're unable to assign a grade at this point because of the elementary status piece of your school. And so we have seen the data and the cohort data. I'm excited about your new principal. I'm very excited about her. She's gone through your training of transformation pieces. And I was excited to visit the school not too long ago. So I just wanted to put that all out there to say that the department's excited that you're embarking on system change, as we are at the state level, to try to provide support. You're welcome. Any other comments from the state members, state board members?
If I could, and I'm obviously a little biased sitting here, but I commended Indianapolis for taking ownership of the problem. And I think that this board can see that what we've done in the past is working. When I talked to Dr. Smith, he said it's not about someone making us do it, we're doing it because it's what's right for our students. And I think that's the attitude that we've created, the attitude that they've adopted. And how I get out in front of this, talking to David yesterday, he said, I think 5 years, 6 years is too many. And talking to Dr. Scott last night, he goes, I agree, we have evidence of year one that we're addressing right now, because 2 years is too many. But I commend, and I'm, anyone that the outreach programs, if you give examples to follow, honestly, Evansville's setting it, they really are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for traveling today and presenting that. I-STEP analysis, Dr. Hill. And thank you, Dr. Hill, for your patience. I know you have to catch a plane here later. Dr. Hill is going to briefly go over the presentation that he gave in his phase 1 of his work analysis, and then he's going to be doing phase 2 of the analysis to share with you for the first time in public.
Don't everybody leave, it's just getting good. Good afternoon. I was asked to take a look at what the impact of the interruptions on the I-STEP testing this spring likely had on the results, and make recommendations about how the data could be used or what data shouldn't be used, and so on and so forth. It's probably best to start by stating that there's no definitive way of stating how students would have scored, either in aggregate or individually, if the interruptions hadn't taken place. Somebody could come to me and say, is it possible that a student scored right around where you expected them to, but only because they would have answered all the questions right except they got interrupted? That's a possibility. But the past is prologue here, and we looked at data across years, not just 2013, but we looked at gains from 2012 to 2013, and in fact looked at gains from 2011 to 2012 to see what that looked like relative to what was happening in the changes from 2012 to 2011. I did a series of studies, CTB McGraw-Hill did a series of studies, and the bottom line is both organizations believe that there is no discernible impact on the interruptions of the test scores for the vast majority of students. I think it's important to note that this doesn't mean that the interruptions had no impact. They didn't have an impact on the test scores, but they certainly had a tremendous impact on the people. There were disruptions. I got a contract I wouldn't have had otherwise. I mean, there's been a lot of people who've been very involved in this. Took a lot of time from the schools, took a lot of time school leadership to try to organize things around the interruptions that were taking place. But the bottom line is it really appears as if the efforts of local people to ameliorate the impact of the interruptions was highly successful. A brief description of what happened. About 1/6 of the students in the state were affected by an interruption. It happened all over the state. It wasn't. It was a fairly random, it appears, occurrence. Over 90% of the students of the schools had at least one student who was impacted on this. It's also worthwhile noting, and we've spent a bit of time thinking about this after the presentation at the state board meeting to the legislature, and try to sort this out. But there's an unknown number of students. We can tell you how many students were directly affected had an interruption happen, but we don't know how many were indirectly affected. That is, all the commotion was happening, that student's test can continue to operate okay, but with all the disruption going on, who knows what happened there. Also, if a student was interrupted in math or English language arts, we don't really have any data on whether or not that had an impact of the student when they sat down to take the English language arts test that happened afterwards. But nonetheless, we've got this. About 95% of the students took the test online this year. That's an increase of 24 percentage points from last year. And we'll get into this a little bit, but those changes were not uniform. A typical pattern for a school, the department has been implementing online testing now for the last 5 years, and a typical pattern has been that the school would start at the highest grade level, move down to the next highest grade level, and then finally in this last year move down to the lowest grade level. So we had a lot of students at grade 6 this year who were taking the test online for the first time, and a lot of students at grade 3 who were taking the test online for the first time this year. People got online, other states were online at the same time, the servers got overloaded, couldn't handle the load. Most of the interruptions that we're going to talk about, that we're concerned about, happened during the first 2 days of testing. In the testing, student sessions of mathematics first, then they take 2 sessions of English language arts, and then if they're in grades 4 through 7, they take 2 more sessions of either science or social studies. Since math was the first test taken, and the interruptions happened the first 2 days, the vast majority of the interruptions took place in the mathematics test. CTB has a tremendous bank of data about the interruptions. They can tell you the time a student was interrupted, how many items, which items they had taken before the interruption took place, how many wrong to right or changes the student made at various times. They have tremendous amount of information. But when they produced their report of the students that had been interrupted on the test, the Department of Education got feedback that there were additional students who had things going on with the administration of their test who were not on the CTB list. So the department sent out the list that CTB had created to individual school districts and asked them to review it and add names to it that they felt were students who had been interrupted. There are some real problems with these data. First of all, they're not at the level of detail that the CTB interruptions took place. CTB can tell you a student was working on item 12 in session 1 when they were interrupted. The only thing we know from the locals is that somebody at the local district said this student was interrupted during the math test. There was also clearly a range of interpretation of what it meant to be affected by the interruptions going on. In fact, one superintendent wrote a letter to the department saying, I'm putting the name of every student in my district, even some who didn't take the test, on the list because it just affected everybody. So I went from a range of people who added 2 or 3 students who they thought were additionally affected, out to some districts where every student was added to the list. So it's harder to interpret the data coming from the local school districts than it is the data from CTB. But nonetheless, these are the data, and you can see that there were more interruptions. First of all, there were a large number of interruptions at every grade, but there were more CTB reported interruptions at grades 3 through 6 than there were at 7 and 8. And we believe that the reason for that is that students in middle school tend to get to school earlier and take the test earlier in the day, and therefore were through the test before the interruptions occurred. The red line above that, the bar, is now adding in the additional locally reported interruptions. And you see there were quite a few, not quite as many as CTB reported as interrupted, but the local schools added a considerable number of students to the list. This is just listing out the number of interruptions by test, math versus English language arts, and you can see that, as I said earlier, math was about 80%. Now, here's the place where I started. And I have all sorts of tables, and if you've seen the report, the tables are in the report. I was prepared to put together a much more extensive PowerPoint. I went over this with my wife. And after I got through this slide, she said, why are you putting any more slides in? So I thought I would go over this in a fair amount of detail and see what happens here. What we have here is I-STEP testing began in 2009. I-STEP Plus began in 2009. It's been going on every year since 2013 was the fifth year. And the basic question, where the presumption would be, is that if these interruptions, particularly in the magnitude in which they happened, had an impact on students, we would see it in the overall statewide results. So the results are what's printed up there is a state mean scale score for grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 going up as you would expect. And what I want to do here is focus on just right now grade 8. First of all, I'm going to discount the 2009 data. There were tremendous gains statewide from 2009 to 2010. That is not unusual for a new statewide testing program. Just getting bugs out of the system, people understanding how to administer the tests, all that sort of thing takes place. So we'll see great gains here between 2009 and 2010, but I'm going to look at the gains from 2010 on. So here we have at grade 8, we had scores that were at this level, slightly higher and very slightly higher for 2010, 2011, 2012. And we have, relative to that trend line, a greater gain between 2012 and 13 than we experienced either of the 2 previous years. So it's kind of hard to argue that interruptions caused a decline in 8th grade test scores. For 7th grade test scores, they were lower this year than they were last year, but they were lower in 2012 than they had been in 2011. So the trend line for seventh grade is identical to what it had been. In grade 6, scores were higher this year than they were last year. In grade 5, they were higher. In grade 4, they were considerably higher, and in grade 3, they were a little lower. And this, when I first saw the data, this was the place that I began to focus on and had a concern about. And one of the observations was in the grade 4 data, is there appeared to be 2,500 students that you would have expected in the end count that weren't there. So back and forth with the department, found out that there was a new policy implemented in 2012 that resulted in the retention of additional students in grade 3 than normally would have been retained. That was the administration of the IRE3 test. And we've looked at the data, and you can see from the data that it is this group of students that were retested as third graders in 2013 that brought down the scores of the grade 3 scores and the elimination of those 2,500 students from the fourth grade population that caused the fourth grade scores to go up. So it turns out that that everything except for the decline in the seventh grade was part of a trend, and even the seventh grade data were arguably part of that same trend. Now that's English language arts, which is the test that had far fewer interruptions in it. Now we look at the math test, which had considerably more interruptions. And we see that grade 8 went up, grade 7 went up, grade 6 remained steady, grade 5 went up, grade 4 went up a lot, and grade 3 went up just a tad. And again, the reason for the tremendous gain in fourth grade was not that all of a sudden the teachers figured out how to teach mathematics better at the fourth grade statewide. It's that this group of 2,400 students, low achieving, were removed from the population of the fourth grade this year and were tested as third graders instead. Are there any questions on this point? Because this is, yes.
I have a question. With the eighth grade scores, you've reached a conclusion that the interruption had no impact on the scores because the scores went up
That's
in
correct.
2013. Is it feasible that the scores would have gone up higher?
Yes. Yes.
So,
And that's why,
or,
and that's why we look at how data has changed across the years.
so if the scores could have gone up higher, I'm questioning your conclusion that it had no impact. If we didn't have the interruption, maybe the scores would be higher on those eighth grade in 2013.
And I said in my very first slide, there isn't any way to definitively state, to absolutely eliminate every possibility. But scores, but this is just one set of data. We've looked at just a wide range of data that would usually give us indication if there was an additional factor going on. The way you approach looking at the data is to ask the question, do you believe there's an additional variable that was added into the interpretation of the data for 2013 that wasn't there in previous years? So you look at things like the mean changes, which is simple. You look at the standard deviations. You look at the correlations of schools across years. You look at the correlations of student scores across years. You look at, there were some schools in which no students were interrupted. We looked at the gains of those schools relative to the schools where students were interrupted. So while it's a possibility that in every school where interruptions took place, students suddenly learned this year in a way that they hadn't, and in schools where interruptions didn't take place, things looked sensibly like they did, consistent with the previous year. That's a possibility. The odds of that are so close to zero that it doesn't seem like a reasonable prospect to pursue. But that's really what you come down to, is that when this whole report is done, somebody could still say, is it possible that something like this could have happened? And all I can tell you is the range of things that we looked at, looking for some additional factor going on in the scores for certain schools, and we could not find that. So, for example, some schools were interrupted a little, some schools were interrupted a lot, some schools weren't interrupted at all. We looked at the gains from 2012 to 2013 for those schools, and then we went back the previous year and took that same set of schools and asked how they had changed from 2011 to 2012, looking for any evidence that the changes that took place from 11 to 12 were not duplicated by schools from 12 to 13. And of course, you'd expect the duplication of it in the non-interrupted schools, but you'd expect something different in the interrupted schools. That did not happen.
So you're doing a trend analysis of some kind,
A
comparing
whole
those.
series of trend analyses, right.
And Dr. Hill, we weren't involved in your hiring as a consultant, and I just have no idea what your background is in psychometrics, and so it might be enlightening to some of us to hear what your background is and experience in the area of psychometrics and testing.
Oh, okay, fine, thank you. I've been involved in, well, I got my doctorate from Syracuse University in 1972. I've been involved in educational testing ever since. I originally worked for the California Department of Education. I moved to New England in 1978. I've been involved in testing and statewide testing programs ever since. I started a testing company in 1984. We were the company that ran the Kentucky statewide testing program, which some of you may be familiar with at the early stages of that. I left that in 1999 and started the Center for Assessment. I was the director of that until I got too old and semi-retired, and the guy who co-founded it with me ran that. I've been involved in statewide testing and accountability systems in, well, the majority of the states at this point. Mm-hmm. Yep.
The mean is calculated by using 100% of all test taken results.
That's correct.
So when did you do the analysis? Did you do it last week? Did you do it 2 months ago?
I did it a couple of months ago, this first part.
What he's giving right now is phase one, and he gave his report to the state commission.
I'm just, excuse me, I just want to make sure.
Mhm.
So you had access to the actual test results 2 months ago?
That's correct. So in addition to this overall look, I looked at school-by-school improvement at the same grade. So we took, how did last year's third grade do compared to this year's third grade, school by school, and broke that apart by things like the percentage of students who were interrupted within the school. We looked at school-by-school gains following the same cohort of students. So we looked at students going from grade 3 to grade 4, looked at that. Again, compared that to the changes that had taken place from 11 to 12. We looked at the results for individual students, and we looked at the gains from 12 to 13 and compared them to the gains that students had made from 11 to 12, and we did that breaking apart by the amount of time students were interrupted for the number of times they were interrupted, just a whole range of things, and there was just nothing there to find. Every time we looked at the students who had been interrupted more, they had the same gains as students who hadn't been. CTB also did a series, was there a question? Yeah, on that last stage. Sure. As I recall your report, it doesn't take the 13 actually show that the well, the thing that you look for in a report like that is a consistent set of results. If if interruptions are explaining something, it shouldn't just explain them in third grade mathematics, it should explain them in fifth grade English language arts. But we did find, to the extent to which there was any impact at all, there was a slight positive impact. CTB wound up coming to the same conclusion on the analyses they did. One of the things I've been working on since I presented to the legislature 4 weeks ago is one of the possibilities that they raised is that the net result of 0 might be a function of two separate things occurring. One is some students were negatively affected by the interruptions, but other students had the opportunity to take a break in the test and go home, ask mom and dad what the answers to questions were, come back and change things around. So we've been hunting that possibility down now for the last 4 weeks, and I'm not quite yet prepared to issue the final report. I thought I knew the answer at the time, but I decided that I needed more persuasive data. And we have now gotten that. We've gotten data from CTB on the number of wrong to right changes that students made. And it turns out that there were a small number of students for whom that was the case. In fact, we could identify them, I suppose, although what the point of that would be at this point, I don't know. But I'm talking a handful. So I'm talking 100 or 200 or 300 students for whom that might have been the case for an item or two. So the impact of this, what I'm working on is a definitive statement of how much that variable might have affected statewide results. And I know it's less than 1/10 of a point of a scale score, and I'm almost certain that it's a number less than that. So it just, while it's true that it certainly happened and it was an occasional thing, the impact that it would have on the interpretation that we're trying to make here is null.
So now he's entering into the second phase, and this is the first time he's given this report.
Okay. Well, the first part of phase 2 was taking a look at what CTB had done. Well, we had conversations with CTB, and I think they had some awareness of what I was going to be looking at because they had to supply me with the data that I was going to use. And I had some idea of what they were going to do because they had outlined a plan for doing that. We worked completely independently, and when they finished, they produced their report. Department sent it to me. They looked at 3 different ways of looking at the state as a whole. They also looked at the statewide averages. They started at the same place I did. They also looked at interrupted versus non-interrupted students in 2013 using different methodology than I had done. And they also looked at scores of students holding the students themselves as their control. They asked the question, how did students do on the test before they were interrupted versus how did they do on the test after they were interrupted? Because before interruption is as good as you're going to do, and then you have the interruption. And so if there were lots of students who dropped off in their performance after the interruption has taken place, that would have been a clue of the impact. They found nothing using that. They did other individual analyses of this before and after interruption, and they also predicted students' performance from previous tests. And that didn't produce anything. So the summary conclusion that I had of the analyses they did is I thought they were well conceived, I thought they were well executed, and I thought they interpreted them appropriately. They in part because they came to the same conclusion I did, that while we can look at this, we can't certify absolutely without any question that nothing happened. It's just, it doesn't look as if the interruptions had an impact on scores. So their analyses and ours yielded the same result. no consistent discernible effect of the interruptions. And while there's minimal impact when it's measured across students, I wrote, it's reasonable to presume that some students were adversely affected by the interruptions. And if that number were small, it would have gotten washed out in all the stuff that we looked at. So the department asked me to pursue the question of, are there some students whose scores we would have enough evidence to invalidate their scores, that the interruption seemed to have an impact. We modified, a little history, you're probably all aware, that in 2012, there was about 10,000 students were interrupted taking the test, and 215 of them, in the end, had their scores invalidated. And there was a process that went through at the time, and we took a look at that, and most of it made sense, but there were some modifications that I thought we might do, and so we wound up doing that. But we looked at how students performed on the test relative to how we would predict them to have performed on the test, given all the other information we had about them. And a student in grade 5 mathematics, for example, some of the information you have is how the students did on the mathematics test in 2012, how they did on the English language arts test in 2012, how they did on the open-ended questions that were administered in the spring before the interruptions occurred. And in the case of the interruptions that CTB had identified, we also knew how the students had performed on the test before they were interrupted. So we used all of that information to predict how we would have expected the students to have scored on the test after the interruption. We also had, the department had received calls from people in local school districts saying something that they had observed was that students frustrated by the problems they were having with the administration of the test just pushed buttons and said, I'm out of here. So we thought one of the criteria we should use is to identify students who took too little time to complete the test. And that turned out to be operationally 20 minutes. Anything less than 20 minutes was operationally defined as a student who just probably just pushed buttons and left. Also, students are given 60 minutes to take the mathematics test and 79 minutes to take the English language arts test. So we figured if a student took more than 10 minutes more than the allotted time to complete the test, that might lead to a suspect result. So what we did is we identified any student who scored 3 points or more, less than we would have raw score points, multiple choice score points, 3 points or more, less than we would have predicted them to have done. This a 46-item test in mathematics. So three items is six percentage points. That's how accurate the predictions turned out to be. So a student who scored 3 points or more and also spent less than 20 minutes or more than 70 or 90 minutes completing the test was identified as a student eligible for invalidation. And these are the numbers associated with that. You can see that there are more scores being invalidated at the elementary grades than in the middle school grades. In part, that makes sense because more students were interrupted at the lower grades. There were just short of 1,000 students that CTB identified as being interrupted who are eligible to have their scores invalidated, and about 400 of the local district reported interruptions. And when we looked at the amount of time that students took, it was fairly consistent across math and ELA. We got 125 in math and 147 students in ELA who took too little time and therefore had their scores invalidated. And then we had students who took too much time and had their scores invalidated. So those are the total numbers of recommended invalidations, 1,101 in mathematics and 287 in English language arts.
Were there any distinctions upon special ed consideration?
No.
on that?
No,
Because some of the kids would have had time and a half.
that's correct. One of the things that we started with was predicting the amount of time that students would take on the test from the amount of time that they had taken the previous year. But the problem with that, or there were a couple problems with it. One of the correlations weren't that high, so it wasn't a particularly good predictor. But the other problem was only 71% of the students took it online last year. 95% took it online this year. So we only had data on 71% of the students. So we just decided to take the absolute time and just go with that.
I will say, Troy, that's one of the reasons the department's not releasing information till September 9, so that the schools have access to the students that were in the invalidation process with this, so they could take a look at that. So that is one of the reasons.
Okay. Well, the final thing we get out of this is the CTB interruptions data. I was asked to do a project like this 3 or 4 years ago in Wyoming when they had online problems. All that they had were the statewide results and anecdotal reports of who was interrupted. So to walk into this and find this gold mine of data that CTB had available that allowed study of this in tremendous amount of detail was an honor, really. It was great. Again, we'll never know definitively how students would have performed if the interruptions hadn't occurred, but it appears that the vast majority of students were able to work through the interruptions without it having it affect their scores. The credit, I think, goes to the people who had to schedule and reschedule and calm students down and get them back in and keep them focused on it. And then the last conclusion is there are a limited number of students who we believe should have their scores reviewed and potentially invalidated.
Are there any more questions for Dr. Hill? Because I do want to share with you the reporting and how that's going to look, because I felt that was important for you to have. I think you've all got copies. Any more questions for Dr. Hill? Dr. Hill, thank you so
Thank you.
much, and have
My
a safe
pleasure.
flight back.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I provided for you 3 different reports just for your review. I want to point out that the very first one, I've written a letter to the parents and guardians on the actual report, and you'll notice that there are no student names on these reports at all. They're just really fictional. But student number 1 on the very first page, it says test not interrupted in the far right-hand corner. So you can see that they would just receive the scaled score. In the back of that, they would receive all of the information by content area. Then on the second report, it says student number 2, it says the test interrupted is valid. And I want to point out that underneath mathematics, when you see that scaled score there, it says your child's scale score is 562, which is a pass plus performance. Please note that your child's results were determined to be valid, although 1 or more portions of the test were interrupted. I made a commitment to parents and to school personnel that I was going to report out all data, and I'm sticking to that. I wanted them to know, I wanted the parents to know if their students were interrupted, but the score was still considered to be valid, and here's the information. On the last one is student number 3, the test interrupted, but it is invalid. So if you look at the mathematics, it says your child's score was determined to be invalid due to the interruptions that occurred during 1 or more portions of the test, and then it refers you to the back. So if you look on the very back page, you will see under mathematics that I have insisted that all score information be reported in the content area. So under mathematics, all the score pieces are reported because they were not interrupted for the entire test. So some of the information and looking at it is informational to the parent and to the student and to the educator. But we have put the letter V beside it, indicating that it was not, that this content area has been invalidated, but we did want to report. Their computer piece system, normally somebody that gets an invalid score gets nothing. There's no information reported. I did not want that to happen. I felt that quite a bit of the information on the testing situation was informational and valid. So I just wanted to share these with you so that you could see the different pieces that will be coming. Sherry, did you have a question?
I had a question. How are the results going to be given
Okay.
to the teachers?
Well, they're available online in ORS, and you should have received the DOE dialogue. I sent it out yesterday again regarding all of this, and you will get a message. You should see a message from me, as well as there's an entire chart in here about the availability of data regarding the ISTEP information. So on September 9th, there will be access electronically through the portal that the educators will use. And then I think that very day or that very next day, educators can use their access code that they have, takes them right to the CTB site, and they can see their reports. So everything will be available
And
on
I
that
didn't
date.
see that. I'm not getting some emails.
You're not getting the
No, I'm
DOE
not
dialogue?
getting that.
Okay, well, you are
Because
all
I would've-
on it.
I would have, well, we were calling nothing
Oh, okay, at your school perhaps? Okay.
But, so there'll be notations, like for the staff to know if it was invalidated, or there'll be.
This is the report that this is the report that they'll see on the student reports, and it will be the same when they see the students' information in other ways as well.
And will the data be on Learning Connection? We've done the dots, the yellow, green, and red dots to show growth and different things for the educators.
Yes, it will be available on that, as well as,
Will it be the September 9th, or will it take longer?
it looks like disaggregated information on the chart that you have. It looks like September 17th. That kind of information that you're talking about, I think, is totally available. I also wanted to be sure that we were going to get information out as soon as we possibly could for school improvement plans. And I have sent that out twice already, that notice to principals and superintendents. We now have a firm date. September 30th, we're going to release all data will be available so that you can finish your school improvement plans. You have all of your data that you need to finish your planning and whatever you need to do. That 1 week later, October 7th, the department, especially for those districts who use RISE, there's an educator effectiveness function in which we assign a 1, 2, 3, or 4 to the teacher regarding the performance of the students in their classrooms, and that will be released on October 7th, so that 1 week later, so that can be completed as well. So by that date, school districts will have all of the information that they need, short of actually calculating grades. The calculation of grades, as you know, and we have A to F here, I think I'll just kind of roll into that if you don't mind, A to F discussion. We do not yet have the reports. We're expecting them this week from Grew and Sheldrick from the Legislative Council. Also, the DOE has its report regarding the 11-12 grade assignments and calculations. And then the 12-13, this board, we're probably going to have to address some perhaps rule pieces regarding the assigning of grades for 12-13 and how we go forward with that. And of course, as you know, in the process, we have a panel that is being composed of four people from that the Department of Education is going to recommend, and the Senate and the House and the Governor's Office. And so we're ready to embark upon that, of which we need to be bringing things to you before November to talk about categories and how that works. So with that, I know that we will probably have to have more than one meeting, perhaps in October for sure, and we'll just kind of start to plan on that so that we can make sure that we're going to get everything where it needs to be and make sure that you're getting plenty of information regarding the A to F process as that goes forward. So I just want to let you know that we have released all of this information to the superintendents and the principals, and I would urge school districts and perhaps in your case, to make sure that those do not get in the spam of the district's technology infrastructure, because I know sometimes that can happen, and so I send out weekly, pieces that are very important that we need to be sure everybody's open. So I just want to let you know that that's all been released. Yes, Brad?
Just for clarification, on the emails, that DOE dialogue, is that what used to be the superintendent's mail? Is that what that is?
It is. It's
Okay.
superintendent's mail and principal's mail.
It's coming under DOE dialogue, because I was looking for an email from you, and it's coming under DOE dialogue on the Senate.
Oh, sure, and that's what always comes out from me. Yeah, she's been seeing it.
And I'm not.
Gotcha.
I have set the date for that to come out each Monday. We didn't have Monday, so it came out Tuesday. Came out yesterday morning. It came out. Or maybe it went out really early this morning because of yesterday was a Monday. All right, I think the last thing under discussion is Common Core, and I need your guidance. I'm not going to do the presentation. Actually, you've seen it before, and you've heard it before, and I know, David, you attended. So you know that I'm committed to the standards review process and making sure that that happens. However, I did submit to you on 2 different occasions now the timeline for the standards review process. So if you could pull that up now. Let me see where it is in mine. Ah. Oh, it's under discussion. We have suggested, the timeline that was given to you suggests that we have the hearings in March. And you will notice that I have a very ambitious timeline to get this accomplished. I want to have the standards approved by this board in April so that we can have implementation, whatever the revisions are for the next school year, and have plenty of time to lead that out and let schools know what the revisions, whatever it might be, in May. And so I'm suggesting March as a time in which we hold those 3 hearings. And we don't have to decide those right now. I just want to know if that's a good time frame for you in order to get all of this accomplished.
I would encourage you to put a month between the time that the roundtable presents the standards and we approve them.
Okay, I
I don't
thought
s-
I had.
No, it says both in the month of April. And
Okay,
I
will you
don't
look
s-
at, does it say it on March as well?
It says present to the roundtable in March and to us in April. And we
Oh.
approve in April. I
Oh,
don't-
you want it further back?
I don't want to get those standards on Tuesday night and approve them Wednesday morning, okay? I want them a month ahead. I wanna be
Oh,
able-
I gotcha. So you would
We
like the
may wanna get our
roundtable
own
in
input on it.
February?
If you want us to approve them in final in April, I would suggest you get them to us sometime between February and March.
Okay.
I understand we'll be able to watch along, but what, the board need, and we're,
We're gonna give you monthly updates, to be perfectly honest. We're gonna keep you well informed about what's going on with the standards revision. I do plan to have the entire team, the committee appointed. Statute requires that I have educators.
I'm just speaking of the last part of the process.
Okay.
Just don't deadline the board.
Oh, I won't.
Give us a month, 2 months.
All right.
To understand what the proposals are as they come out of the roundtable.
Sure.
And then to be able to absorb those.
All right, thank you. Any other suggestions for the timeline?
Well, are you
Yes, yes, yes. And actually, all of those can happen within a week's time in March. We've run regional summits at the Department of Education, and we typically try to do them, boom, 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 even within a week's time.
The fiscal results from the OMB mentioned that, the sooner we make our decisions, the better off fiscally we are. And so, I would encourage you to be as soon as you can get, if we can have our public hearings before March, let's have them in November. I just want to, I'm sure there are other reasons, but
Sure.
I'm just saying, I think we need to expedite ourselves as much as possible to make, if that makes any difference at all.
Well, let me talk to you about why I wanted to do it after we've actually had the review process. I'd like for the dialogue at the regional summits to really be about the standards. In order for it to be really about the standards, I would like to actually take what are proposed revisions to the summits. So we actually talk about what they are. I really think that, and we're also going to have public comment time too as well regarding that. But my purpose in having the summits, from my point of view, is to be sure that we're getting input from the public on the actual revisions that we might be proposing. So we can do that before or after the roundtable, but that's my purpose. To do it sooner would simply be a conversation about Common Core or no Common Core. I want the topic of conversation to be about the standards and any revisions that might be proposed through the revision process.
And when is the revision process?
Right, and so in the timeline, I'm having the committee appointed by September 10. I plan to announce the teams at that commission hearing. And then the following months, the teams will be meeting. And then we want to take them to the roundtable, I heard David say, perhaps in February. And at that time, we might be able to move up when we have the hearings and public comment. We'll see if we're ready to get all of that done. And then I want final approval by the April meeting. So to make sure that that's all intact so schools know what they're going to be doing for the next school year. Because there's no lead time that's been allowed within this process to have a year of implementation. So there's been none of that. So we want to make sure that what we do is going to be doable for schools when they come back. But I hear you. I wanted them later in the process, the summits, so that we could really talk about what we're thinking about as revisions and really get real input on that.
Since I'm not sure I know the answer to this, I'd really encourage us to create a mechanism to be able to confirm to ourselves and to the rest of the world that our standards are as good as or better than anybody else's. In some way, they may be Indiana standards, I don't know how that'll shake out, but if we don't have the ability to have a comparison that has validity about what we're asking our students to learn, we're going to start the race for attraction and retention of human capital miles behind.
And I will tell you that, it does say in statute, there is a commitment, and I know the term was used today, college and career ready. That commitment to having college and career ready standards is already there. But I hear you. I hear you talking about making sure that they're top notch. All right.
Just a quick question
Sure.
on the membership of the standards groups in the past. Being on the university side, but we typically get a unit head notification for a request for subject matter experts from the university participants committees. I haven't seen that. So I just wonder, is there intention to have university subject matter experts with K-12 on those committees?
Yeah, well, let me tell you, I've got two things going on, because I want actually more input than you can possibly imagine. So we're appointing our educator teams, K-12, okay, because they have to serve in the subject matter and they have to be teaching the standards currently. And then I'm having advisory teams. And that's where I see the universities getting involved and having some advisory team and experts, as David's pointing out, some people that are coming to the table to actually help with the guiding of the process of the revision of the standards. So that part will not be appointed solely, by September 10. I'm working on just the teams that are required by statute, that I have educators, and I have to have them by some grade levels, and, we have a lot to look at. We're talking K-12 here. So I want to be sure that we're working on that. I do know that my department is getting those names together, and they are looking at having representation in terms of bands of teachers. So, like K-3, so that we can look at really how things progress from the standards, instead of just a viewpoint from just like a kindergarten teacher. So we are looking at having some pretty broad perspectives.
And are they revising the standards, or are they reviewing and comparing the two standards? Are they?
The process calls, as it always has, to work from the standards that you have current in place. So currently in place, we have the Common Core standards. That will be what we are working off of and talking about the review of those and how that goes forward, and are there any changes to those that we want to make. Okay. Thank you very much. Because that input is very valuable. I'll go back and revise that timeline and resend it out to you. We are down to board operations. Oh, sorry, David.
This flashes back to earlier in the meeting. I remain confused about sources and uses of funds for all the interventions and the actual contract relationships. And I wondered, I don't want to burden the whole board with a day long, but I'd be happy to come in and, if I could, and sort of just, if you'll allow me a chance to understand them and get them, how much, where's the money coming from, where's it going, what's that actually doing in each school that we have an intervention with.
That'd be great.
I'd appreciate that opportunity. And if somebody wants to join me, feel free.
We are to board operations 2014 meeting dates. We had a request to perhaps change a couple of dates. I gave you sent those to you. The January 1 obviously is on a holiday, and so we're suggesting January 8. And then there was a request for a change in March and May, and because the I-STEP test is given during that time, and we do have 4 educators on the panel. No. I wanted to change those last year, Carrie. So I'm suggesting March 12th, and I'm also suggesting May 14, which is just 1 week beyond, which will not interfere, hopefully, with our assessment process. And then July 2nd is just so close to the 4th that will interfere, so we're suggesting July 9. So if you don't have any further changes, I'd like to reissue that. April 2. And what about April 2nd? No. Yes, I can. So, in fact, I can give them all to you. January 8, February 5, March 12, April 2nd, May 14, June 4, July 2, August 6, July 9, thank you, I was reading the wrong one, July 9, August 2nd, excuse me, I just read it again, August 6th, September 3rd, October 1, November 5, and December 3. And I will get those together for you. Yes,
Just
David?
a comment, since we're talking about dates, obviously we need to look at the time of the meetings, and we enjoy being here for multiple hours, but sometimes the public is sitting here for 6-7 hours with us, and I'm not sure that's the most entertaining thing to do in Indianapolis. And I would hope the DOE staff and the state board staff would get together and just take a look at that, whether we need to break for lunch and then very clearly state in our agenda which items are going to be afternoon items and which in the morning. That way, we have people in the public who can really earmark when they're going to be with us. So I would ask maybe before the next meeting that can happen.
I would agree, as well as to make sure that the agenda is doable in the first place. The other items that come before the board, we have board orientation and strategic planning. We've not yet set a date for board orientation. So are there any comments about that?
I would just say that if we're going to meet twice in October, I don't know if we have orientation to that in October.
Well, and we can add it to, like the day before to one of the meetings. Yeah, you want me to put out some proposed dates or get with your staff and, okay. Anything else to come before the board? We got SBOE staffing.
Yes, I'm doing the staffing. At our July meeting, we tasked Claire Fidian Green and Dan to look at the staffing for the State Board of Education. And I have a resolution to put into effect officially our new staff. And so I'll read it. It's being submitted to you in writing. Whereas the State Board of Education approved a resolution on July 19th, 2013, authorizing Dan Elsener to work with Claire Fidian Green to create a staffing plan for the State Board of Education. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the State Board of Education appoints the following staff: Ann Davis as State Board of Education Director, Michelle Gow-McCowan as General Counsel for the State Board of Education, and Claire Fidian Green as Technical Advisor to the State Board of Education. Be it further resolved that Dan Elsener is directed to create a job description for the Executive Director, General Counsel, and Technical Advisor. And be it further resolved that the State Board of Education authorize the Director to administer the State Board of Education budget and to spend board funds as necessary to implement State Board of Education directives, initiatives, and policies. I put that forward to you in a motion.
I saw this for the first time yesterday, so I'm going to make the same comment that I did before regarding action coming before the board. That should happen within a particular process on how that occurs. And so I'm going to let this motion go forward, but I will also say that I am going to be opposed to the motion, and also state that for the first time in the history of the State Board of Education, to my knowledge, the governor's office has not had control of the budget for the State Board of Education and have their own staff. And so it only seemed to happen after my election. So I just want to point that out, that I will be opposed to this motion. Any more discussion? Those in favor say aye.
We have a roll call.
You may, although it's not part of an action item.
But I'm requesting it as a board member.
Go ahead, Laura.
Troy Albert,
Yes.
David Freitas,
Yes.
Andrea Neal. Yes. Fred Oliver,
Yes.
David Shane,
Yes.
BJ Watts,
Yes.
Terry Wicker,
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz.
Opposed. Any further business to come before the board? This meeting stands adjourned. Thank you so much for your patience.